Bad news and some good news. The bad news is I'm not giving away any Smarties this morning. They all have to go home with me, which I guess is the good news. So I did this little test to see how many of our people are actually on our social media platform on a regular basis. And last night I put out a little question that said, and basically said the first 5 people to come after 10:15 this morning with any idea of what text I was preaching on, I would have a prize for. And none of you came to me, which is bad news on a number of fronts because I really don't need to eat any Smarties. So I'll probably save them for another time. But just know that it might be next week that we have something like that available on our social media page. And it's too late because I've already given the answer, but it is kind of hard to read. Any guesses as to what we're talking about today? Yes. The story of us, very good, very good. But I was thinking more specific, that is really good. You will have Smarties to share. And this story is found, I wonder if you could figure that out as well. Can you figure out where to find this story in your Bible? That's awesome. You have very great eyesight, Jan. You have Smarties too. Smarties for everyone. You get a Smartie and you get a Smartie. So does anybody have any clue as to why the title of this message is what it is? Or even what the title of this message is? About puppies and pathways. This is where Jesus talks about puppies. How can you get a better sermon than that? One with Jesus and puppies in it. And don't say by having kitties too, because they don't count. Right? Sorry, I just offended most of our crowd, but now you know where I lie. Well, let's get on with our message for today. So we're going to be in Matthew chapter 15. You can read pretty much the same story in Mark chapter 7, and I'll make one reference kind of to that area, but it's basically the same story, a few different words. But you'll notice we put a picture of, I think that's Shanna, or it's her sister and her mother, in part because I just think it's a good story that Carol's feeling much better today. And that's a good thing, right? Very good thing. Now, when I put it in there, I didn't know for sure that would be the case. I was kind of hoping that would be the case. But if not, it was also kind of a prayer prompt. But also because I've been doing a deep dive into some of your social media accounts, and some of you have more pictures of your kids than others. For example, I got this great picture, this next picture. Alvin and his son. Thought that was a great picture. Let's see, we got another good picture here of, that was Gary Richardson's son, evidently, on his wall. That must be his baby or his dream baby, one or the other, but that was right there on his wall. Let's see if we got another. Oh, yes, I did dig deep and found this one. And I was going to use this for the entire story, but our story today is just about a mother and a daughter. And there's a bonus child in there. So instead, we'll use this one, this next one. Yeah, they'll be our pictures today. Now, some of you have noticed that there are people that we wish were in worship with us but are not worshiping here with us today. But I happen to know the Moores have been worshiping at home with us, trying to, with school and this disease and all this, just kind of a concern of maybe wanting to distance a little bit more and keep people safe. So you can be praying for them and others that haven't been here recently. But I thought that was a nice mother-daughter combo we could use today. Just to remind you that our theme for this overall story comes from Psalm 107, which says, "Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His love endures forever." And remember that his love endures forever. This is talking about that never-ending, never-failing, steadfast, hesed love of God that says, I make this covenant that I will not break this covenant with you. I will love you. And because of that, we want to do what the next verse says, the next slide. Let the redeemed of the Lord tell their story. And so that's what we're doing. We're telling our story. Today, we're going to hear a little bit more. We're going to read a story about a woman who really has a great path to Jesus. And so I'm going to pick up in Matthew chapter 15. We're going to start in verse 21. Then Jesus left Galilee and went north to the region of Tyre and Sidon. Now, if you happen to be reading this story in Mark, you would notice a couple of things different, because right here in the story, Mark gives us this great detail, and Mark loves to give details. He says, Jesus went up there to get away. He was headed up there to take a break from the crowds, which everybody needs a break from the crowd once in a while, right? Jesus himself wanted to get away. And so Mark gives us this added detail that says he went up there and he went to this house, but he could not be hid there. He could not get away from what he was trying to do, even though he needed to. And I point that out for a couple of reasons. One is I just want you to know that he went to this region where he really hadn't been yet. So it's not like he had this reputation in that area. He had started to build a reputation in Galilee, and there were some people probably that had been in and out of that area that may have come up to Tyre and Sidon. But this woman finds out about Jesus. Now, this particular translation calls her a Gentile woman. I think actually the word that Matthew uses here is a Canaanite, whereas the Mark's story, he actually gives the detail maybe a little more specifically that she's a Syrophoenician woman, okay, a little more detail about her background. But all of these things are true. For example, I am finding it interesting that when people ask me, so where are you from? Well, I'm from Texas now. Via Nebraska and Iowa and Tennessee and South Dakota and Nebraska another time in there, somewhere in there. But I'm from Texas now, I think. I'm about to have an address with a zip code in Texas and everything. Then I can register my cars and be from Texas. I don't know if that makes me a Texan yet. I suppose that won't happen until I get the joy of not paying a state income tax, which I can't wait to not do. Or when I get the Southern drawl. Or fall in love with country music and get a big pickup again. All of those things are available in other places, but not quite like Texas. But I can be from Texas, or I could be from the U.S., or I could be from the West. All of those things are true at one time. So don't let it shake you that Mark says Syrophoenicia, and your Bible might say Gentile or Canaanite. All of these things are probably pretty good descriptions of this woman. One of the things it tells us for sure, though, is she was not a Jew, and she was not from, like, anywhere around Jesus. She was from up north, so to speak, north of that area. Doesn't seem important yet, but it will. So a Gentile woman who lived there came to him pleading, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. For my daughter is possessed by a demon that torments her severely." But Jesus gave her no reply, not even a word. And then his disciples urged him to send her away. "Tell her to go away," they said. "She is bothering us with all her begging." Then Jesus said to the woman, "I was sent only to help God's lost sheep, the people of Israel." Was she one of them? No, she was from up north. She wasn't. She was like a Canaanite or a Gentile, or was from this little area, this little region. But she came and worshiped him, pleading again, "Lord, help me." And Jesus responded, "It isn't right to take food from children and throw it to the dogs." Which I think most of us would agree with. Like if our children were starving, it's probably not prudent to take food from the kids and give it to the dogs. Like when I was a kid and we had broccoli and my dog liked it better than I did. that was an act of generosity on my behalf. But in this case, I don't think that's what this is. I mean, what is Jesus saying? And is this the Jesus that you learned about in Sunday school? One that when somebody comes and is in need, he is silent? And then seemingly, maybe even slightly, can I say this, offensive? We fire Sunday school teachers like that when we had Sunday school. That was a thing to be ended. But she replied, "That's true, Lord. But even dogs are allowed to eat the scraps that fall beneath their master's table." And Shanna, I do have a dog in the office if you need her to help with that. She's super good. My dog loves being here at the church right now because you'd be surprised at how many little spills and things that you leave behind that she cleans up all week long. She loves it. So you're not the only one doing that, Shanna. Watch. I'll find out later it wasn't Shanna. That's true, Lord, but even dogs are allowed to eat the scraps that fall beneath their master's table. Maybe your version says crumbs. I suppose it depends on what you're eating. "Dear woman," Jesus said to her, "your faith is great." This sounds like the Jesus we know, right? "Your faith is great, your request is granted," and her daughter was instantly healed. This is one of my favorite stories in the New Testament. It was also my nemesis in my hermeneutics class that I did in seminary. There are so many things in this little story to unpack and so many details. Like, we could focus on the 4 obstacles that this woman faces. I mean, you see them, they're pretty obvious right off the fact, right away. Jesus, it's kind of like the story that we told quite a while ago from John chapter 8. Jesus encounters this woman, and that's not really a popular thing in his culture. The first obstacle is her gender. She's a woman. Jesus is not identifying as a woman here, and yet she identifies with this woman and has a oh boy, was that wrong. He identifies with this woman and has a conversation with her. That was not supposed to happen. It's a huge obstacle, but this woman didn't let that get in the way. The second obstacle that we see here is her race. She's a Gentile. She's not Jewish. As a matter of fact, Matthew, referring to her as a Canaanite, probably strongly suggests that she was probably fairly religious and the opposite of Jewish. Like, there was a real clash between her and him when it came to religion. And then the third obstacle here I've already referenced a little bit, but Jesus is silent. Have you ever had a conversation like that where you're trying to talk to somebody and they just refuse to talk? It can become uncomfortable. Especially when you're pleading and begging for your daughter who is sick. You've left her bedside. You have probably done everything you can, and you hear rumor of this person from down south, a southerner, who is in the area hiding out. That would seem like a pretty big obstacle when you go there and he just says nothing. And then there's this fourth obstacle that shows up, and the disciples, Jesus' followers, his closest among him, how do they respond to this woman? Just get rid of her, Jesus. Send her away. I imagine they were kind of uncomfortable with the silence as well. But that's what Jesus had gone there for, is silence, right? That's what we thought. But Jesus probably knew better. He also went there to meet this woman, most likely. He seems to have a knack for that type of thing. So we could focus on those 4 roadblocks, and I think those are things that we should keep in mind, and those are things that we should pick up out of this passage. We should pick up on this woman's persistence. That we should pick up on the fact that this woman overcame every one of those obstacles, even though every obstacle became bigger. But she didn't give up. We could focus on this woman's patience because it takes time away from her sick daughter, time to go to a strange man. It takes time to deal with his silence because I think you don't note that silence unless it's significant. I don't think this was Jesus didn't respond right away. And 15 seconds later, he responds. I think it's a notable silence. That's why Matthew notes it. And I don't know if that's a few moments or a few hours, but I know that in a situation like that, a few moments feels like a few hours, right? When you are in dire need of help. So we could note her persistence, we could note her patience. We could even spend quite a bit of time trying to unpack why Jesus responded the way he did. Like, we have an idea about why he initially might have been silent. I mean, he went there for silence and retreat and to take a break from the needs. It reminds me of the story of this guy that went and he was part of a program at a monastery where he was led for a period of time. I think it was about 3 months. He was led in this time of restoration and renewal. But shortly after he got there, the guy directing the program took 2 weeks off. Now, how would you feel about that if you went somewhere for restoration, renewal, and you're going to be directed by that, and your director says, I'll see you later, I'm going to be gone for 2 weeks. And the people that were part of the program said, wait, we're here for your help and you're leaving. And he said, listen, if you're dying, I still need to leave. And the guy writes about this and he says, for me, that was as shaping as anything I learned there. He was modeling and demonstrating to me and to the rest of the people there that you can't give what you don't have. And sometimes you just need to take a break and reset and refresh and retool, which it seems like that's the whole reason, according to Mark's version in chapter 7, that Jesus went to this lady's house. So his silence is somewhat explainable. What seems unpardonable is his response, not the silence. But let's go back up to this part. I mean, when I first started reading this story, a few things really bothered me. Verse 23, when Jesus gave her no reply, not even a word, that bothered me. Then the disciples urged him to send her away. That bothered me. And they were just blunt. Tell her to go away. That bothered me. She's bothering us with all her begging. That bothered me. And I think all of those things bothered me is because the reason they bother me is I've felt that way. I have nothing to say. Go away. But I never thought Jesus would feel that way. I never thought Jesus would treat somebody that way. But what's really made me reach my tipping point was this part where Jesus says what he's thinking. Then Jesus said to the woman in verse 24, I was sent only to help God's lost sheep, the people of Israel. Does that bother you? That bothers me. For one thing, is it true? Did Jesus only come to save the lost sheep of Israel? So then I'm met with this dilemma of, well, I've never known Jesus to lie. So what's going on here? And his next explanation isn't much better. She came and worshiped him. That tells me that she must have went away and came back, and this time she worships him, pleading again, Lord, help me. And Jesus responded again, it isn't right to take the food from the children and throw it to the dogs. We don't advertise this story much for a reason. That's not the Jesus that we think we know and think we love and think we understand. And so I had to study and read and think, and I spent a long time on this one, and this was a difficult project. And then I came across this little tiny book called How Jesus Won Persons. 15 case studies from the Gospels. And she's one of the last case study in here. She's this little Canaanite woman. And it's really probably about 7 or 8 pages total for the story, because it's a pretty short story. But in here, I think DeLoss Miles nailed it. And he nailed it in a way that most of us probably don't imagine Jesus. He says this: we may see in this case an example of Jesus using humor in evangelism. I'm sorry, but so far this story doesn't seem very funny to me. But then there's this picture. Let's go to the next picture if we could. There's this picture that came to my mind of a little girl and her puppy. That happens to be our little girl and her puppy. And when going through this story, my thinking is we should listen to Jesus in this story. We should learn from Jesus in this story, and we should live like Jesus in this story. And I don't just mean tease women, but I think that's what he's doing in this moment. Now, Michaela, you might recognize that Halloween she dressed up as a character. Anybody know? You get a Smartie. Yeah, Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz. I don't know, did you like that movie? It's kind of a thing, like, there's things I like about it, like Judy Garland was amazing. The fantasy of it is amazing. The fiction of it is amazing. The reality of it is horrific. Like, if you read the book and you know anything about the guy that wrote this story, this whole thing, well, one person has called it an atheist manifesto, The Wizard of Oz. Do you know who the real hero is in The Wizard of Oz? Is it Oz? It's probably, who did you say? Yeah, everybody has kind of their own thought. It could be the good witch, right? It's certainly not Oz, right? The man behind the curtain, which represents God, or at least institutionalized religion. Actually, I think the hero in the story is Dorothy's guide all the way through. I'll give you a hint. It's in the basket. Toto. Toto is sort of the hero. Toto is the one that Dorothy continues to turn to for insight. And when she listens to Toto, things go well. Like when Toto brings up the scarecrow and barks at the scarecrow because Toto knows something's not right about the scarecrow. And who is it that pulls the curtain and reveals the man of Oz? Toto. And Toto represents human intuition. Dorothy's constantly having this conversation with Toto. And I wish I were better at language and words. I think it's called Theophis. Theophist? Basically, the guy that writes this story about the Wizard of Oz is presenting his philosophy, his religion, which is essentially that all religions have the same road. And if we just follow human intuition, we'll find the real source of strength and power. You can study that some other time. We're not here to study the Wizard of Oz. But I bring that up because sometimes a story is more than just a story. One last piece of trivia. Anybody know what color Dorothy's shoes were? Yes, in the movie they were ruby red slippers. Does anybody know what they were in the book? Silver. Very good. Excellent. You get a Smartie. And the silver represents, well, it's the thread of the connection between the physical and the spiritual. It's really an interesting story to study. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a good story, but I think it's a good story to study and understand because, hey, here's the bottom line. Sometimes things are more than they appear to be. And I think in this situation, in this story, when we read this story about Jesus, there's more to it for us to see and understand in this story. And the use of humor is one of those things. Is it possible that Jesus was just being funny here or using humor to reach this woman? Let me continue to read what he says. Some have suggested that Jesus playfully uses the diminutive word for dogs, kunaria, meaning doggies or puppies, thus indicating that he did not really despise foreigners as did some other Jews. So here's the deal. It wasn't unusual for a Jew to refer to a Canaanite or a Gentile in general as a dog. A Samaritan, we've seen it in other places too, that referred to as dogs. Usually, though, the word that's used there has to do with being a wild dog, a vicious dog. And Jesus uses the term puppy. Well, let's read it again that way. Verse 26, Jesus responded, "It isn't right to take the food from the children and throw it to the puppies." It's a different word picture. And this woman comes back and she seems to understand something that we don't in this, which is Jesus is welcoming her to continue to the conversation. She said, well, even the puppies get the scraps from the table. It becomes a much more playful interaction. The tone is different when you substitute the idea puppy in there. And I'm not here to make a big theological argument about puppies. What I want to say is Jesus actually cared about this woman more than the story initially causes us to understand. And if we were to go back and read previously in the chapter of the stories, Jesus is pushing back towards some of the religious hierarchy and the teachings of his days, including some of the, well, especially to the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes. He's pushing them out of their comfort zone. He's interacting with this woman. He's doing things with this woman that he shouldn't be doing. And what I mean by that is they look at this woman and say, you shouldn't be talking to this woman. That was their cultural thought. But they also look at this woman and say she is unclean. As a Canaanite, she was considered not just a woman, but an unclean woman. At least talk to a Jewish woman, Jesus. Not this unclean woman. But Jesus had just talked earlier in the chapter about purity and what makes a person clean and what makes a person unclean. In some ways, this story bounces right back from that, and he comes on, and in that context, I think what he's saying is, you might see this woman as a dog. At worst, she's a puppy. It seems like playful banter, and if you're uncomfortable with that idea, that's okay. You don't have to believe that to go to heaven. I just don't like the other explanations that are out there when it comes to this. I don't think Jesus is the kind of person that goes around insulting and degrading people the way that you have to believe he is if you don't think he's being funny. I don't know. If you have an alternative explanation later, I would love to hear it. But there are a lot of things we could talk about and focus on from this chapter. But I think what we would be best to focus on here in the midst of our series is this woman's journey. Because it's the story of us. It's most of our journeys. It's also the story of most of the people we care about. And so what I would like to do is I'd like to focus on 6 words that never show up in the text, but show up. They're not words that are used, but they're words that describe what's taking place. In verse 21, when it says, "Then Jesus left Galilee and went north to the region of Tyre and Sidon," it meant that he was going into new territory where he was virtually unknown. And that's the first word I'd like to point out. This woman comes to Jesus and says, before she even comes to him, she's like, "Who cares for me? My daughter is ill. Who cares about that?" And when people don't know Jesus, life is different. I think it's so important for us as believers to take time to think about what life without Jesus is like for people. Think about your own life. What kind of value does being a part of Christ's covenant bring to your life? Can you imagine life without the church? And even more so, life without Jesus? I think if we could somehow picture that, we might be more understanding and more committed to talking to the people we love about Jesus and the church. See, when Jesus is unknown, I'm unaware my story matters to Jesus. And my phrase is, well, who cares about me? And what people who are in this phase of life need from us as the church is they need people to hear their story. What I'm doing in the next 2 weeks is trying to lay out a vision for you why I want us to do some special gatherings to share our stories with one another. And at those gatherings, I would love it even if you have a friend who has a good story to tell, which, spoiler alert, everybody has stories. Life is a story, and the author of those stories, your Father, is moving in people's lives. And we need to listen to those stories. We need to hear their story, and we need to help connect their story to our story and the Father's story. And the third thing we need to do, we need to hear it, we need to connect it, and we need to honor it. When we honor somebody's story, we honor them as people. And I will just tell you, very few people are out to honor one another these days. Most of the people that we meet need to be honored. Now, I'll tell you one thing. I have enjoyed a lot of experiences around here. And one of the phrases that I love hearing around here, I hear it at the grocery store. I used to, love it when Chick-fil-A came up with that, my pleasure, my pleasure. And I, at the drive-thru, when I would order from Chick-fil-A, I would always try to say my pleasure before they said my pleasure. It's difficult to do, and very rarely do you get to be the last one to say my pleasure. And sometimes you can get them to laugh. Most of the time they don't. But here's what I love about being down here. The grocery store, the gas station, pretty much anywhere I interact with people, even today, getting in our car, not from a worker, but from a guy parked next to us. We were at the Market Basket down here and picked up a couple of things before church. And this guy's getting in, and he finds this card on the ground. It looks like a gift card to Longhorn Steakhouse, I think he said it was for. He says, "I think you dropped this because it was by our car." I said, "Sir, that's your lucky day. We didn't drop that." That's for you. That looks a good day for you. That's a blessing for you, And he picks it up, he puts it back down. He says, "No, I bet somebody will come for that. You have a blessed day." I love hearing that from people. You have a blessed day. You have a blessed day. I hope it never gets to be like, see ya, or hello, sayonara. There's this sense that God is blessing, and these people are blessing us with this idea of having a blessed day. I'm just going to tell you, that doesn't happen everywhere. But when I hear somebody say that, I feel honored. And I think that's something we need to do. We need to honor the people around us, strangers and friends alike. So when we encounter somebody who's unknown, or maybe you still don't quite know who this Jesus is, then I'm really glad you're here or listening online, because we want to model who Jesus is. But for those friends and loved ones of yours that maybe still aren't into Jesus, one of the things that they need to know is that their story matters to Jesus, and the way they're going to discover that is not by you telling them something, but by you listening to them and honoring their stories and celebrating them. The second word I think that we pick up here is in verse 22. The word doesn't show up there, but the word shows up there. What I mean is the word's not in the passage, but the passage shows the word. A Gentile woman who lived there came to him pleading, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David." Well, obviously she knows something about Jesus now, but I think there's still some uncertainty. And that's the second word, is uncertain. That we all go through this time of uncertainty where we're not sure that our story matters to Jesus. And in this phase, people sometimes wonder, why would Jesus care about me? And I would think that that's where this woman was before she came to Jesus. Like somebody said, hey, maybe there's a teacher in town. Somehow she found out he was there. Somehow she must have even heard that he'd done some crazy wild things in Galilee before coming to where he was at now. Somehow, someone had started to expose her to the fact that Jesus might help her. And she doesn't come and get real specific in this statement, but she comes. And she even calls him by a title, Lord. Even more specific, Son of David. She's uncertain about this whole thing. She doesn't know why Jesus would care. But she just says, will you have mercy on me? I don't know about you, but I've felt that way before the Lord, and I know him. But I have things that I want to pray about. Lord, have mercy on me. I remember when we accepted our last call to ministry, and it took almost 5 years. Well, it took 5 years to sell our house. And this year when we accepted a call to come here, and we still owned a house, Lord, have mercy on me. I prayed that with uncertainty because of some experience, not because of the God that I worship. I'm so grateful that instead of 5 years, it's more like 5 months. We close this week, hopefully, on our house in Nebraska. It was supposed to be tomorrow, but some dummy left some old wood under our deck and a termite showed up in it, so I guess that's a $1,000 board. Anyway, but the point is the Lord had mercy on me, and in this moment, she doesn't know if the Lord's going to have mercy on her. And a lot of the people we know and love are uncertain as well. And I will just say this. I love apologetics. I love the study and understanding of science. There are many things that give me confidence in my faith. But the thing that helps me best have confidence that God is who God says he is the encouragement I get from hearing the stories of other people and his faithfulness to them. I'll just use this as an example, but praying for Carol this week, and I sent Shanna a little text, and a little concern that mom could get sick while I was in the hospital. That's everybody's concern right now, right? That I might go to the hospital and be sicker when I come out than when I went in. That's a concern, a genuine concern that we have. And I just sent her a text, and I said, my folks have been in the hospital almost 30 days since this whole COVID thing started. And my mom, she has zero immune system, you mentioned sneezing, she's got pneumonia. And I was like, I don't know if that's will give you courage or not. And Shannon was like, yes, thank you. That's an encouraging thing to hear. I can't say that that'll happen for Carol or not, but I'm so glad that she's doing better now. And we all hope and pray, and we continue to pray that it'll get better. But there's something about hearing the experiences of other people and their stories that help give us courage in the midst of our stories. And so even when I'm not certain that my story matters to Jesus, and I'm trying to answer this question of why would Jesus care about me, in the midst of those, even in those circumstances, we need to be willing to share with people. Not in a way that is pushy, but in a way that provides courage. So, having heard their story and their struggles, and having connected with their story and their struggles, and having celebrated their story with them and honoring them, then there might be some room to start to remind them that Jesus does care about their story. And if not to remind them with words, which I think are important, but we could also remind them with our actions. We can show them that Jesus cares. We can teach them that Jesus cares. All three of those are important, that we remind, show, and teach. But this is the part that we can start to get involved in that feels a little more active. Now, this is not convince them. This is not win an argument with them. This is sharing our experience with them. Having heard their experience, understanding a little bit of their struggle, speaking into that from personal experience, these things make a difference and start to work on the hearts and minds of people. Well, the third word that shows up, that doesn't show up here, is the idea of being known. In verse 25, it says, "But she came and worshiped him, pleading again, 'Lord, help me.'" The word known doesn't show up there, but the concept does. This woman is moving past uncertainty. She is back in his presence, knowing that he can help, and responding to who he is. That's what worship is. It's a response to the presence of God in our life. It's a response to the activity of God in our life. And in this woman's case, it's a response to the inactivity of God in her life, but she still responds. She comes and she worships him. This is her, in her heart of hearts, knowing that her story matters to Jesus. She believes that. And that's what we want people at this stage to begin to understand. My life matters to Jesus. And I don't know where you are, but I have a sense that there are probably a lot more people in churches around the country that are about here, or maybe not quite here yet. Like they think their story might, as opposed to being confident it does. I'll tell you, one of the things I've been praying for in the church in Afghanistan right now, and missionaries that we know in Afghanistan right now, is, Lord, I know their lives matter to you. Give them that confidence in the midst of these difficult circumstances. This is where we want people, when they come to church, we want them to get here. We want them to get to the point where they're confident that their life matters to Jesus. And so, as a church, we're going to celebrate their stories together. You know, I don't know all of your stories yet. I'm slowly getting to know them. Found out this week we have a missionary in our church that I didn't know was an overseas missionary. I didn't know that. I can't wait for you to hear that story. I hope she'll tell it. She has stories to celebrate, but you have a story to celebrate. And really, what I'd like to call this is the storied life, and that's why I have this picture of Michaela and the dog up there. But the phrases, let's go back a little. Oh, we'd have to go back too far. We won't go back. I'll just remind you that we need to listen to Jesus, learn from Jesus, and go like Jesus. That's the storied life. We need to take what we hear, process it, experience it, and go and share it. And so that's the simple pathway to this whole thing. When you come to Jesus, you need to develop this faith that says, my life matters to Jesus, and so I'm going to listen to him, I'm going to learn from him, and I'm going to live like him. And that's our hope, that everybody would get to that point. One of the ways to do that is by sharing our stories with each other. Jesus told stories everywhere he went. We need to be telling these stories so that we can encourage one another. Well, that takes us to the fifth word that isn't here, but's here. The fifth word is the word certain. And we see that show up in verse 27. Jesus has just responded, it isn't right to take food from children and throw it to the dogs. But she replied, that's true, Lord, but even dogs are allowed to eat the scraps that fall beneath their master's table. She pushes back against this man, this Jewish man, who was silent and then seemingly disrespectful or at best joking with her. And she pushes back, and it shows that she has certainty that Jesus can do something in this. Since my life matters to Jesus, his life matters to me. I'm sure my story matters to Jesus. That's what she shows. And so she's going to live that way. And there are things that are going to be reflected in her life. And this is, we've been slowly revealing this picture again of mother and daughter together. But one of the things I love about this is, and you'll see it even more when we get to the next slide, is I love that they're wearing the same dress. There's this certainty that comes from getting to know Jesus and wanting to live life like Jesus and to live a storied life. Because our lives can, and this is the sixth word, inspire. And in the next picture, you'll notice mother and daughter, same dress. There's just something about that brings joy. Now, we have this awful picture. I'm really glad I didn't put this picture of my son and I up. We both have these pink shirts on. He looks super cool in it. He looks super cool in it, which is why I don't have that picture anymore. But there's something honoring when I remember when we bought the shirts. The shirt was way too big for him. It was way too small for me. But we decided we're going to wear the same shirts one day. I did not look near as cool in it as he did, and he didn't look as cool as he thought he looked in it. But what I love about it is that memory of him wanting to be something like me in that moment. Our stories inspire others. My story can inspire others in their stories. If I matter to Jesus, so does everyone else. So my story must be told. And I think the best way to tell our stories is, first of all, living a valued story, so that people see the value of Jesus in our life. That leads us to the final word that we see here that's not here, and that's the storied life. Oh, I didn't read this, but they're both in the same verse. Verse 28. Dear woman, Jesus said to her, your faith is great. Your request is granted. And her daughter was instantly healed. Man, that's just short and to the point, isn't it? Jesus didn't do a whole sermon to this woman. He saw her great faith, her persistence, her patience, her desire to overcome every possible hindrance on behalf of her daughter and in faith of her new Lord. I wonder what it was like for this woman when she got home. When she came home to her daughter. I imagine they celebrated. I imagine that it was quite the time, because I know what it's like when my kids have been sick. And by the way, Matthew doesn't point this out, but Mark points out that this was a little girl. This was a young daughter, not an older daughter. This is a young daughter. Our kids are older now. It's a little bit different. We don't worry quite as much about them from day to day. That doesn't mean we don't worry day to day, but it's not quite the same. Like, we don't have to worry if they're going to run out in the street after church. There was a time when we did. But I'll tell you what, we may not worry about them, as often as we did, but we celebrate them every chance we get. We still find great joy in our kids. And the times to celebrate are not always as often anymore. They're just everyday days. And then there are these moments that we get to celebrate together. This woman, her daughter, was instantly healed. I can only imagine what it was like for her. And I think one of the reasons we need to tell our stories is we need to tell the good stories and the bad stories so we can give people courage during both times. We've been talking as a leadership. Matter of fact, a couple of times this last week we've had a chance to talk, and I think this is a difficult chapter in the church's story. When we look around the room and the chairs are more empty than full, when we look around the room and we see faces that are no longer there, those are difficult times. And we don't always know the reasons for all of those things. I sent a text to family this week, sent a text to the father and just said, hey, miss you. I'd love to get together with you. I'd love to come out and see you or stop by. I know your schedule's crazy. I know lots of this, that, and the other thing. Just know that I miss you. And he sent a text back saying, I'd like to see that happen. That'd be good. Let's find a time. I'll let you know. Something like that to the people that you miss here might be all that they need. Some might need more. Some might need less. I don't know. Some might be planning on being back and they've just been busy. I don't really know, but here's what I do know. There are a lot of people here that we miss having here. I think we went through as a leadership, and we went through about 17 different households that we think, last we knew going into COVID, were probably still a part of the church, but they haven't been back since we started gathering again. Some of those people still comment. I know there was a woman that hasn't been here since I've been here, I don't think, and she sent me a message last night saying, I'll be watching online tomorrow. That's awesome. I love to hear that. I'd sent her a message earlier in the week, just providing some encouragement, and I think we need to do that. And I don't know where these people are. I don't know, because I haven't met a lot of them. Some of these people may be in the certain stage or the uncertain stage. They may be in the known stage, or they might be in the inspired stage, or maybe they need us from an inspired stage to speak into their uncertain stage. Here's what I know. We've got to share encouragement with one another, and that's why we're moving into this time of telling the story of God in our life. I think it can make a difference. When we hear one another's stories, it helps us to live fearlessly. And in this current environment, we need that. That's what I love about the passage that Kieran read this morning. Therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let's throw off everything that hinders us and the sin that so easily entangles us. And let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, which I know that's not exactly the way her translation read today. But I love the next phrase there, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of God. That little phrase, who for the joy set before him endured the cross. Do you get that? It's like the cross was a joy. Well, the cross was a joy because of what it was taking him to. Who for the joy set before Jesus. What was the joy set before Jesus? Fellowship with us in eternity. The completed good work that he would get to sit down at the right hand of the Father and be an advocate for us. And send us an advocate in the Holy Spirit that would not just live around us, but would live in us and through us. This is the joy set before Jesus. Now that's a story worth living and telling. Let's close in prayer. And Joe, go ahead and bring the team up. That'd be great. Father, help us to ponder these things. Help us to remember that you are faithful and true, and that your story, your word, when we hear it, when we read it, when we absorb it, it will have great value in our life. It will strengthen our faith. It'll move us forward. Father, I just want to take a moment and pray for Christ's covenant. We've been in a discouraging time, but I know from a gathering of about 5,000 pastors this week from our churches that this is a story that's being repeated all over the country right now. Our churches are struggling. Our churches are going through difficult times like the church has for centuries before. But Father, this is not a new story for you. You've been faithful to the church through generations. You've continued to bring back hope and joy. Father, may we continue to celebrate your story, the story that tells us that Jesus came as an expression of your love for us, to tell us that we matter to you, that our sin is forgiven, that he paid the price. And that when the price was so high that he paid for our lives, we need to live them to the fullest for his benefit. So, Father, would you lead us into that as a church this week? In Jesus' name, amen.